I'd like to just remind everybody too, and I'm sure you've looked at it now, John, on the Restoration Archives site under regional meetings. Now we have all of your stuff there and it's directly linked to YouTube. And you also have a playlist there if you go into it so that you'll be able to go through in order and see all of the slides. So we have a playlist set up too.
That is great.
So they're all there. So you can even point your Instagram folks there. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, John, and let you get started.
I'm looking, I didn't write down where we got to last week.
Yeah, we were at 142.
Okay, good.
So I think we're 143 then.
Good, excellent. Thank you. It's good if we have a backup because I forget sometimes.
Yep.
Excellent. So it's 8 o'clock. It's time to start. So let's see what we did. Yes, we got up to we did 142. That was a good stopping place with the birth of Isaac. So what we're going to be looking at now, we've got a few calendars under our belt. We've got the Hebrew, the Venus, the sacred round, and we're going to start seeing the interaction of marriages where the husbands and the wives are tied to the same calendar, and then the parents and the children. We just saw Abraham and Sarah being tied to Isaac. Now we go to Rebekah. This is our first mention of Rebekah, I believe. And I chose this picture because it shows she's just a young girl. I've tried to look up the old English meaning of damsel because they refer to have different words like maiden and damsel. But from what I can tell, damsel is somewhere in the 10 to 14, 10 to 13 kind of age. But this is Eliezer picking out the girl that's going to help water the camels. You remember that story. But Rebekah is amazing. At first, when I first you get Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they were all kind of equal. But when I got to the wives of Sarah, Rebekah, and Rachel, and Leah, Rebekah just was the shining star. I was almost concerned that she was so much better than everybody else. Now that I've got more calendars, it's just that hers were focused more on these first calendars that I'm teaching them about in the order that I learned them. And so Rebekah, Isaac's wife, is born Tuesday, 8th of November, 1923 BC, on one birth, Venus. That's the one day out of 585 that represents birth, and she's born on the day of birth. Sarah wasn't born on anything on the Venus calendar, nor was Abraham. But she's born on one Jaguar, and one Kislev is not an amazing. It's a minor holy day, the first day of each month. Kislev is the month around November on the Hebrew calendar. Jaguar is not an amazing day either, but she's going to die on the day one Jaguar. She's born on it. She lives an exact number of sacred rounds. She lives, I've forgotten it all, but her life is just amazing by itself, let alone how it's going to tie to her husband and her children, or the main child of the twins, Jacob and Esau. But I've got here, she's on holy days on 6 other sacred calendars that we haven't gotten into yet. So anyway, she's on special days. Let's go to slide 144. Now this is Abraham's attempted sacrifice of Isaac, and it's on the Day of Atonement, which That's the day for reconciliation with God and that kind of thing. One quickening on Venus. A lot of stuff in Isaac's life is going to be on the Venus calendar. And as I've said before, that each person, it seems to be mostly on one calendar. And Abraham's is not on Venus. His is going to be, I think, mostly on Jupiter when we get to that. It's partly on Mars, but Mars is more like Aaronic priesthood, and Jupiter is going to be like higher priesthoods. Everything on John is on Mars. He's Mr. Mars. Anyway, one quickening on Venus. It's on the equinox on the Enoch. Now, see, this is not a birth or a death. Enoch is more for ordinances, and this was like a sacrificial ordinance. One deer, I don't see a particular meaning for that. It's just a sacred day. And, 7 delivered on the priest calendar. He was delivered. And so that's right. We have these 5 calendars we've already been through. So anyway, that's on a special day. It turns out that same day, look at Friday, 20th of September, 1915 BC. I don't make a point in the slides, but for those that have eyes to see it, Abraham's wife Sarah dies that day, Friday, 20th of September, 1915 BC. She is not there. They're off on Mount Moriah doing this. There's a story in the book of Jasher about it. And one of the nifty things about these sacred calendars is you can check to see if something is correct. In other words, for her death date, it's got to be tied to Abraham. And for instance, this is the Day of Atonement. Well, let's see, that was nice for a sacrifice, but that's Abraham's birthday. He's born on the Day of Atonement. So she dies on his birthday. That's the kind of thing that's a double check that, hey, that makes sense for her to have died on that day. And one quickening on Venus. That's unusual for Sarah. That's tied more to Isaac in his experience. Equinox and one deer. So it's wholly on the same days, but there's different symbolism. If you want just a quick rendition of the story in the book of Jasher, Abraham, of course, is not telling his wife what he's doing. In the Bible, just says they're going to Mount Moriah on a trip. Isaac doesn't know what they're doing until the time. And there's a story that Satan appears to her and tells her that, hey, your husband is sacrificing your son. And one reason I believe this story is they make a point that Sarah is a seeress and she can hear truth. And if Satan tries to lie to her, it's not going to work. She can hear truth. So Satan comes and tells her the truth. And she's pretty upset that he's up there sacrificing. Well, when the sacrifice doesn't happen, Satan appears to her again as an old man and he says, hey, I've just come back and the word is your son is alive. The sacrifice did not happen. Tells the truth. And she is so overjoyed, she dies of a heart attack. With these sacred calendars, I'm able to verify that day makes a lot of sense as her death date and his sacrifice date. And that to me is one of the powerful tools of why this is worth learning. Go to 146. After Sarah's death, by the way, Isaac, if you look at those dates and numbers, he's 37 years old at the time. So he's not a little boy. That's why I chose that last picture of he's a 37-year-old man when he's offered for sacrifice. So it's 3 years after her death, when he's age 40, that's when they send Eliezer down and they find Rebekah. He marries Rebekah, and it's 20 years later that she bears the twins. So he's 60. Oh, and she's pretty young, but it's 20 years later. So she's around 30 and he's around 60 when they have their twins. And from what we can tell, that's all the children they had. Abraham, oh, and I put two things on this one slide, which is not recommended because I try to cram too much down people, but that is, that's just saying the marriage happened. Abraham dies. He's, I think, what, 175, I think, when he dies. And so it turns out it's one light. That is Leah's death date. It's one Sivan. That is Rachel's death date. That's another month in the Hebrew calendar. And it's one resurrection, like Isaac's birth. And when we continue on, we're going to find 3 dates where Abraham's death and Isaac's birth, I think it's like maybe star dates or something else. There's going to be 3 links just between Abraham and Isaac. Links meaning the same day on one sacred calendar. And so he's tied to his wife, to the children. Anyway, I'm trying to make these points.
Glenn, he's on, yeah, there you go.
Oh, I forgot to check. I thought he was on the right slide. Pardon me. I will look at the screen you're looking at. I will stop. See, I look at the other one and I go ahead and then I don't tell you when to change. So I apologize for doing that. It's okay. So this is the picture. 146 is of Sarah's death, and I was reading about Abraham's death. Okay, now let's go to 147, and I will make sure we're together. Now, after Abraham's death, the Lord covenanted with Isaac. This is important. We all know Lord covenants with Abraham, and we talked about that here. There was the circumcision was the token of one of the covenants. But the Lord does his own covenant with Isaac. And this is not, I don't believe, in the Bible. This is in the book of Jasher. They give you enough information to get the year. And if I have the year, I can get the date. So it's also on the Day of Atonement and the equinox and one consecration. And the other one was on equinox and atonement, as I recall. So it's following a pattern here. Okay, next slide, 148. Now I'm going to put in the years because we don't think of these years much. We're told in the Bible that Isaac is old and his eyes are dim, and he's going to bless his sons. And this is where they do the goatskin trick to make Jacob feel like a hairy guy like Esau. He's 123 years old, and he blesses his son Jacob, whom he thought was Esau, on this date, which was Passover and Easter, and one piece left. And we just saw that his wife, Rebekah, who's right here in the picture, she was born on one piece left. So it's her birth date. It's Easter. It's Passover. Anyway, it's a holy day. We always think it's like near the end of his life, right? Because he's old and blind. Well, he is 123. He lives to be 180. And these numbers are all in the Bible. It's just you have to actually stop and think about the numbers. So he's apparently blind all those years afterwards. And until you plug in the numbers, you don't notice things like that. Anyway, that's a sacred day that can be known. And the boys were born when he was 60, so they're 63 years old. They're 63 and getting their blessing from him. Isaac's going to give other blessings to the grandchildren, but this is the blessing of the 2 children that was so important. Okay, that's 140. Let's go to 149. So now Jacob, after this is Jacob, the son. He was 63 at the blessing. This is another thing. I don't even explain it in here. He's pretty old when he's going to go find Rachel. Let's see what I say. En route to Laban's, he's going to Laban's because his brother Esau, after that blessing, finds out that what happened, and Esau is basically going to try to kill Jacob. Jacob's got to get out of Dodge. He's got to leave town. So he's going to head over. Well, he goes somewhere else first for several years. He goes to an academy taught by Shem and Eber. And it's quite a while before he makes it over to Laban's, but he's got to stay out of the Hebron and area. Anyway, this is on his way to Laban's house, 1815 BC. And this is where he dreams of the ladder going to heaven. He builds an altar. This is all the same place. So these two slides are basically the same place. And he built an altar at Bethel. And I saw that the altar, when I was doing this, I saw that building the altar was as important, if not more so, than the dream. Anyway, when he gets there, this is on his way there on the 25th. He's going to get there. Oh, here he's going to get there and start on the 9th of April. So, a couple of weeks later, in order to marry Rachel, Jacob agrees to work for 7 years, and he starts on Sunday. Remember, that's not a holy day. Saturday's their holy day. So this is like the first day of the week to start work 6. Well, we're not even sure how much they kept the seventh day holy. I will tell you this, Jacob's life is built on 7 years. He works 7 years here, he works 7 years there. He goes to Shem and Eber's for a multiple of 7 years. Everything in his life is in 7 years. And when we get to his death, it's going to turn out he lives exactly 3 jubilees, 7 times 3 times 7 times 7 years. His whole life is on sevens. And each one of these prophets illustrate a different thing about chronology. Anyway, he signs up to work 7 years in order to marry Rachel. That's when he starts. It's an Easter Sunday. It's Passover on the Jubilee. He's passing over from the old country into the new country. And it's on one dwelt. He's going to dwell in a new land. So these are meaningful holy days. Let's go to slide 150. Now, I just jumped to when he leaves. I'm going to skip all of the births of his 12 children while he's there. I skipped the wedding days. I'll come back to them when we know more. But as you know the story, he worked 7 years and got the wrong wife, and so he's a good sport and worked 7 more years. But he gets the right wife just a week after. So the two, Leah and Rachel, marry him just 1 week apart at the end of the first 7 years, but then he worked 7 more. And then he was about ready to go after 14 years. During the second set of 7, all of the 12 children were born. And then they stay 6 more years. So he stays almost exactly 20 years there. So he returned home after 20 years working for Laban with all of his family. And he passes over the Jabbok River by day, and he wrestles with an angel that night. That's what's going on. That was on Saturday. It's at the end of Passover. Remember, he started Passover when he went there, and 20 years later he comes back on end of Passover, end of transplanting. That's really nifty. On the Jubilee calendar, remember, it's all about planting and watering and then transplanting and then harvesting. So he was transplanted over to Syria, and now the end of the transplanting. Oh, yeah, and during the day, it was the end of transplanting, and then at night, it was the new year, And Passover on the Jubilee calendar starts the day after the end of transplanting. So it's just this great symbolism where you've done transplanting and now you pass over, and it's when he, and they say in the book, they give you all these hints. They passed over the Jabbok River on Passover. So again, I hope you see that these calendars are not just random holy days. They're telling you about the events that are happening. Okay, let's go to slide 151. Okay, now we're up to Rebekah's death, and we're almost at time to stop, so this might be a good stopping place. So we told that we saw how she was born on one jaguar. She lives to be 133 years old. Sarah was 127, but both Leah and Rachel, I think Rachel lived 48 years and Leah only lived 50. So she's got a long life. And she dies on the 6th of April, Saturday, one jaguar. It's her birth. Oh yeah, and Rachel's death. So see, it's tied to her daughter-in-law. She's the mother of Jacob. This is Rachel's, her daughter-in-law. One Lord. Now here we go with the deaths dying to the husband. Isaac's death was on one Lord, and she dies on one Lord. So they're on the same day on that. And she dies on Easter Sunday on two calendars. And that's Joseph's birthday on both of those calendars. So you can see all this family ties, and these are all big holy days. One jaguar is not as big a holy day, the blue of the minor, remember. But it's her day. She's Miss Jaguar. And whenever I see one jaguar, it's like, oh, that's Rebekah's day. You know, it's she owns that day, whereas almost nobody really owns Passover or Easter. They're pretty much major. Okay, I say let's stop there because we're going to go on with where Jacob goes. But wait a minute, let's see. No, we're going to do two more slides. See, it's good for me to look ahead. Do 152. These are short. On the way back, that's when the Lord makes his covenant with Jacob and is renamed Israel at Bethel. This renaming Israel is interesting. When he wrestled that angel, the angel said, your name will be changed to Israel from Jacob. But it doesn't happen right then. I'm not sure why the angel said that, like a preview or something. But the actual covenant and the rename Israel happens at Bethel on the way back on this date, Saturday, 10th of October, on our calendar. Again, Day of Atonement, end of Tabernacles, and one chief is the first day of the priest cycle, and it's a priesthood thing. A lot of these renaming and covenants happen on key days on the priest calendar. It's the priesthood ordinances. And on the way back, he also erects an altar at Bethel. And he did going and coming, as I recall. So, and now we go to the next slide, 153, and then we'll stop on this one. Isaac, now this is when Isaac's going to die at age 180. He's already blessed Esau and Jacob. They get one main father's blessing. He was old and thought he was going to die. He was 123 and blind. And 60 years later, on the day of his death, he blesses Esau and Jacob's sons, his grandchildren. And he dies, and that's in the book of Jasher. And on this day, and it's on Zero Lord, and that's going to tie, oh, here it is, I say it. Zero Lord Venus and one Kislev. That's his wife's death date. She died on Zero Lord, and he lived after her, 180 years. And that's her birthday. So see how cool that is? That's the exact number of Venus cycles and Hebrew years from her death to his death. One to the death and one to his wife's birth. Anyway, I'm just saying they have all these interacting cycles. And 13 Eagle is the last day. What's the day after? Oh, no, that's not true. It's just a great holy day. That's all. This is a subject in one of my recent papers. I have a huge section on his death date because Joseph, we're going a little over on the time, but this is really important. Joseph was in prison, so he just does 11 of Jacob's sons, not all 12. Joseph's in prison down in Egypt. They think he's dead. So he doesn't get blessed. And in this paper, I talk about this very day on the star calendars. And it turns out on the star calendars, on one calendar, it's Joseph Smith's birthday, on the star birthday. And the other calendar, it's the birthday of another prophet that's going to come in the millennium and gather Israel. And I don't bang you over the head in the paper with who it is, but it's might be somebody we know. And those. So the point is, Joseph is not the blessing, but something that was likely would have been said to him if he were there would be something about two of his different descendants, one of whom is straight from Ephraim, from him, and the other is part Ephraim and part from Judah, and known as the branch in the Isaiah prophecy. Okay, with all of that in mind, let me now go to the question, and we'll start next time on the Mercury calendar, because you've gotten the idea here. I'm just trying to teach the ideas and give enough example that you'll kind of believe in them. Let me tell you two things that are new. Maybe it's just one thing. Okay, it's perfect for this class because it's going to use the very principles that I just demonstrated. This week, the last 2 weeks, I've been doing genealogy. I have felt pushed to do it, and I do what I feel is right every day if best I can. And for somewhere in going back, trying to get my roots all the way back to Adam if I can, I stumble across Mary Magdalene in the FamilySearch.org, and they have down for her a birth date and a death date, a year. Born in AD 3, dies in AD 63. I've never seen dates for her. It's at the end of a king list, and they kept track of all the kings, and there was the legend or history or whatever you want that she was married to Christ and had a child, and the kings, and that's the Holy Grail. And so these kings were very interested in keeping their genealogy that they descended from her. So I assumed, with zero research, that those two dates came from these old king lists because they kept track of the years. The point is this. I've just told you the way I got these dates of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is first, you need the year. These are proposed years, whether Floyd Schwartz just made them up out of his head or whether they're from a king list. Somebody has produced 2 years for Mary Magdalene. I can use sacred calendars to find out if they're correct or not. Because of point 2, she is clearly tied very close to Christ as a spiritual companion. Whether or not they're married is sort of beyond the point. He appears first to her after the resurrection. He tells her to go tell the apostles. In his book, she's above the apostles. And there's a lot of apocryphal books that make it pretty clear that they're married. If they're married, do you think they're going to follow the same pattern as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their wives? Yes, of course. So the way I can check to see if those dates are right is by looking for, does her date tie in to Jesus Christ? And I know all key dates in his life. Are there proposed dates in those 2 years that would tie into Christ in a way that's convincing, where you say that's way beyond chance? The answer is yes, and that paper with her birth and death dates will be published this coming Thursday on my website. And now, there's something I haven't done yet that I might. Now that we have her dates and Jesus's dates, especially, just say her dates, they show a son listed for her that the kings are going to come through. And they have a year of birth and death for him. I can do the same thing with him and see if I can find dates that tie to her. And by the way, it's so hard to find these that if the dates are wrong, the answer is no. I spent forever getting some of the dates where I tried every year, I tried everything, and there was just nothing. So it's not like I can just do this magic in a year. I don't know if their children will be included or not yet. I haven't done that. But it's a great potential use in genealogy, which I've known, but I've never actually tried before. So that's something hot off the press. Okay, now I've used half of our question time, but now in the last 10 minutes, I haven't received any mail questions. Let me click on Mr. Chat Box, and I don't see any questions here. So I will just turn it back to Glenn to ask people, are there questions?
All right. Hey, so I do have a question too with these alignments. I don't know if you've done any work or if it's even possible to pull birth dates from those down in Egypt, but obviously Egypt is very important. As Christ went down there, Abraham went down there, Israel went down there. Pertaining to dates and calendars there, is there any tie or is there any commentary that you have on Egypt and the significance and any alignments with calendars? Because, of course, with Asenath, do we have her birth date?
Yes, but not from Egyptian. Let me see if I understand your question. It sounds like it's about Egypt had some well-known calendars, and it sounds like you're asking, has anything been done with actual Egyptian calendars and Egyptian chronology to tie it in?
Yes.
Okay, let's answer that one first, and then we'll go to Asenath. No, Egyptian chronology is so messed up. It is not based on anything. They're hundreds of years off. It's well known that they're 300 years off. There's a book called not Ages in Chaos. That's Velikovsky. Centuries of Darkness. Book called Centuries of Darkness, and they point out that the way they date pottery in Europe is by saying this is Egyptian stuff, and the way they date Egyptian is from the European stuff, because there was some trading, and the guy shows very well that they're 300 years off. Velikovsky, in his research, showed that they were several hundred years off, and I believe he's correct on that. He's messed up on a lot of stuff, but he's a brilliant man and did a lot of stuff right. So Egyptian chronology is a can of worms where they have no clue when most of them lived. So what I have found is the Bible, that really works. When we'll get to Asenath's birthday, I don't know how to say her name. Look, Asenath, Asenath is something. I say Asenath. She matches the pattern exactly. And you have to know who she is. She's Joseph's niece. She's Dinah's daughter. Joseph has a sister named Dinah, and she has a daughter, and she gets taken to Egypt. That's a long story. but she fits the same pattern of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob exactly. But as far as Egyptian chronology, it is a can of worms. I've always wanted to do it, but it's hard to even get a starting place to nail down anything. We're going to be really surprised when you find out when people lived. They lived much, much later than everybody thinks. So did I answer? I think I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. Thank you. And
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
So, John, I try and pay attention to your published dates. So Thursday's one read, Christ's birthday.
Absolutely.
That seems to be a pretty good clue of your findings in your paper on Thursday.
Absolutely, you nailed it. Oh, and by the way, I will tell you guys the secret stuff that I don't tell everybody. But the secret stuff is almost always the Lord has to give me a bunch of signs to give me the confidence to do this. I mean, I discovered a date yesterday, and 5 days later I'm going to publish it. That's not a lot of rechecking. Well, the secret stuff is after I get the date, and I believe it's her death, Mary Magdalene's death is going to be on one read. And his birthday is one read, and that's how this works. You saw the ones. They're not usually born on the same day. It's one's birth, one spouse's birth is on the other spouse's death, and it can be either one, male, female, switch back and forth, but that's very common. And that's all through the other in the old patriarchs, Eber and Peleg, and it'll say he lived so many years after his son's birth and he died, and those two will be on the same day, son's birth and his death. So it's a common pattern. So now the secret stuff that I will publish. The secret stuff is then I pray to know when should I publish this, and it usually is going to be within 1 to 2 weeks. And when I pray that, sure enough, 5 days after, and this is a paper I can write in a day. I've already got it half written. And sure enough, 5 days after I discovered it's one read, and it's like, and it's a bunch of other holy days. And it's like, okay, I'm in, it's like, in other words, the secret part is, yeah, the day on which I publish it usually is the day that's the paper is about. And I don't have to wait 260 days. I had to wait 5 days. And that's like a little sign to me that, yep, you got it right. Go for it, publish it. So I'm just saying I get a lot of help with this, even on the day it should be published. Yes, you're right. That's what it's going to be.
Just-in-time knowledge.
Just-in-time knowledge. Oh, yeah, and I told you one of those just-in-time things that where it was, I was only left with 2 days to write the paper, or 3 or something, and you just have to trust the Lord and do what he shows you and what he tells you. So I'm very excited about getting her. She's a major figure, and to get her vital dates is a big deal. Okay. Another question I see. Have I read David Roll on Bible in Egyptian? No, I've never heard his name. You want Russell? I'm not sure who's. Oh, yeah, it is Russell. Do you want to comment on that, Russell? Why I would maybe want to do that?
I'm sorry. Hang on just a second. Sure. All right, let's get my microphone going. Yeah, he's done a pretty good analysis of pointing out where these errors and how things are shifted off by up to 300 years or so, and how to line them up correctly. I'm trying to remember his last video he did. I'll send you an email that gives you a little more information on it.
Okay. Thank you, because I haven't heard of him, and I've never heard of anybody. And my definition of right is, I really believe the date of the Exodus is known. It's written in stone now. And so if they can come up with anything that's near what's in the Bible, because there have been books about the Pharaoh, an LDS guy wrote a book about something like who was the Pharaoh of the Exodus, or yeah, that was it. And he wasn't a big scholar guy. He was, I think, a seminary teacher or something. And I believe he nailed it. I mean, and what's his name? Velikovsky found this one scroll that talked about, that described the plagues from the Egyptian side, and everybody's dying. And then even that the king died. The Bible says that the Pharaoh goes with the chariots and he doesn't come back. And that's in the Hebrew, that's in the Egyptian history. To me, that's a match, and you can tie that to the year 1462 BC of the Exodus. And then this guy started taking the kings. Oh, and in the book of Jasher, it says how long the different kings lived, and he started to match it up. So that I really believed in. He was crucified by the BYU scholars of what a fool, who does he think he is? He doesn't, because he's actually, anyway. So I thought he had it right, and I've never seen anybody else do any better, so I can at least mention that book. So yeah, I'll try to check this guy out, because I've always wanted to do that. But there's so much to do first to see. I'm making a standard to which I can now compare Egyptian and help correct it, because it's so far off. Okay, so all right, we're almost 1:45. One last question from anybody?
Hey, I have one more, John. Pertaining to books, we've talked before about Book of Jasher and those books that you have on your website with Enoch's record. Are there any other books that are your go-to that are significant with dates? Because you seem to trust Jasher, of course.
I trust both of them. Enoch and Jasher are both legitimate, the real thing. All the rest, to me, are fake. I've gone through, the book of Jubilees is filled with dates. They'll tell you the date that all these people are born. It's just filled with stuff, and it's all nonsense as far as I can tell. Nothing pans out, nothing works. It's fabricated. And I've read several of similar kinds of books which are considered equal to Enoch and Jasher, which means that they're all considered apocryphal. The short answer is no other go-to book. Oh, except I find myself right now very interested in the genealogy. The people who trace their genealogy all the way back to Adam, I don't know exactly. I've only looked at a few of those. The few I've looked at, they all do the same thing. First, you get some ancestors that hook into the kings. You follow the king lists back, and you end up with right around Mary Magdalene or Joseph of Arimathea, or people that went to England from Jerusalem. And then they tie them back into the Bible and go back to Christ somehow. So the key place to tie into is there. I now am very interested in that. Who was Simon, who took over James the Just's place as the presiding bishop, was Simeon, and he's the daughter of Mary and Cleopas. Where did I get that? That is out of Eusebius, who's the official church father history. So this is not apocryphal books. This is the early fathers. I want to get a whole set of their books and go through it, because one thing they understood was the genealogy of Christ. And now it's time to stop. But I have a paper. If you want to know, in Matthew, there's one genealogy for Joseph, and in Luke, there's another genealogy of Joseph. And everybody says, oh, yeah, the one in one of those is actually for Mary, because they're different, right? No, they're both of Christ. One is the House of David one, which includes adoptions, and the other is biological. If you want to understand that, I have a paper called Jesus Christ, son of David. And that will explain the genealogy. Because the son of David is is adoption. Why? Because who's his father? His father is Heavenly Father. He's not a descendant of David on the man's side, and that's how they count the house. So he's adopted in. And that paper will explain how it happens. So adoption is extremely important. Biology is extremely important. Families are extremely important. I'm done.
All righty. Well, thanks again, John. And look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks, everyone, for joining. We'll conclude.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.